Really, since the Jody Wilson-Raybould story, have you seen any real accountability journalism in Canada's mainstream media? How about even on the pandemic itself? Of course, readers see that too, which is why alternative media such as Rebel News and True North and Western Standard Online and Blacklocks are gaining viewers. Why would you pay $1 or $2 for a copy of a newspaper that is little more than laundered Trudeau talking points? You can get that for free from the Liberal Party website if you really want it. But others see what's for sale too. Others with money, like China's Communist Party. So they see that all the newspapers in Canada are desperate for a bailout, so desperate that they're willing to sell their own soul to Trudeau. Well, Xi Jinping has more money than Justin Trudeau. And look at this. So he buys 2, 4, 8-page spreads in Canadian newspapers where the Chinese embassy literally writes every word. In the small print somewhere, you can see that it's a paid ad, but it doesn't look like a paid ad, does it? It looks like news reporters writing in a newspaper, and it's called China Watch, as if it's some skeptical watchdog, someone watching critically like Neighborhood Watch or Crime Watch. No, it's Chinese propaganda. I just showed you a recent spread in the Globe and Mail. Now, here's what the Toronto Star's Rosie DiMano said. She saw that spread and she said, "Shame on the Globe and Mail for running Chinese government propaganda by publishing paid content from the international propaganda arm of China's state-run English language newspaper. The Globe made itself a shill for a government that's at diplomatic war with Canada," Rosie DiMano writes. I agree with the Toronto Star, which is quite rare. But then look at this. Holy moly. Not only did the Globe and Mail do it again, but China cut the Toronto Star in on the deal. They must have read Rosie DiMano's great piece and thought, how do you shut up a journalist in Canada? Back in China, you throw them in jail. In Canada, it's actually much easier. You just buy, a $50,000 or $100,000 ad spread in the newspaper, and the editor will shut up the journalist for you. How humiliating for Rosie DiMano. The entire editorial board of the Toronto Star was humiliated, by the way, which they should be. And they wrote this. They said, "Our collective China hypocrisy. Talk is cheap. Real change will require unified sacrifice. If we want to begin to have an impact on the Chinese government's behavior, we need to collectively open our eyes more, not less." Oh, and look at this. Over the last few years, newspapers around the world, and many in Canada, including several in our group, such as the Toronto Star, have been running advertisements or advertorials paid for by a Chinese government-sponsored organization, China Watch. Yeah, no, speak for yourself. Most journalists haven't sold out to China. We haven't. Neither have most people. It's no excuse for the Toronto Star to do it because the Globe and Mail did it. You are properly humiliated by your ad department, and the fact that you are making excuses for it and calling for someone else to take a stand while you won't is pitiful. If a newspaper in Toronto can't take a stand against communist China, well, then who can? What a bunch of losers. But they are who they are. They're for rent, and now everybody knows. It's really gross. But back to Xinhua for a moment. That's China's equivalent to Reuters or the Associated Press. It's a news agency, except every word is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. So it's actually an impersonation. They call themselves a news agency. They say their staff are reporters. Their website, in Chinese and in English and many other world languages, by the way, looks like a news website, except that it is all 100% controlled by the Communist Party of China. You cannot criticize Xi Jinping in the Xinhua News Agency. You cannot write about the plight of Tibet or the Uyghurs or Hong Kong or Taiwan other than to condemn those people. You cannot praise democracy or Christianity or any rival thought system or ideology. I'm sure some of their human interest stories are politically neutral, but even as I say that, it's not true, really. Everything must support the narrative. China is happy, powerful, successful. Its rivals are immoral, hypocritical, and weak. So even weather stories, even sports stories would be propaganda for Xinhua. But Xinhua is much worse than just propaganda. I mean, the CBC here in Canada is propaganda too. It's owned by the government. Everything I just said about Xinhua could in some way be be compared to the CBC or Britain's BBC. But there is one thing that is worse about Xinhua, and I've had this confirmed to me personally by Dr. Charles Burton, a former Canadian diplomat to China, who now writes about the Canada-China relationship. He says that reporters from Xinhua call him up as reporters to ask him questions. They say they're reporters. They say they're doing a news story. But no news story is ever written or published about what he says. Dr. Burton says it's obvious what's happening. They're actually just spies. They do write up a report based on what he says, but they don't file it as a news report publicly, but rather they file it as a report to the Chinese embassy about the views of Canadian scholars who track the Canada-China relationship. It's espionage. Dr. Burton is savvy. He knows what's happening, and he's not giving any secret intelligence. In fact, he usually criticizes Communist China. But let me give you a darker example, and it comes from Mark Burry, a journalist in Ottawa who actually worked for Xinhua for a while in Ottawa. Let me read to you what happened when the Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of Tibet, and a great enemy of the Chinese Communist Party came to Canada. So I'm going to read to you at some length from this, but I just want you to see it. So just FYI, Zhang Da-Cheng, that's the name of the boss of Xinhua in Canada when Burry worked for them. So, by the way, he was an army officer. So like I say, it's a Soviet-style propaganda project. They're not real journalists. So let me read a few paragraphs. Give me 2 minutes because I really want you to hear straight from a guy who actually worked for Xinhua in Ottawa and what they really did, okay? It was the Dalai Lama who tossed over the apple cart for me. He came to Ottawa this past April 27th, the featured speaker at the 6th World Parliamentarians Convention on Tibet. Xinhua asked me to cover the session. When I asked if the material was being used for a news article, Zhang said yes. The next day, the Dalai Lama spoke to a packed hall at the Civic Center. I bought a ticket and sat in the crowd. As I left, my cell phone rang. Zhang, who had been with the press contingent on the floor of the hall, wanted me to cover the Dalai Lama's press conference, held a few minutes after the public event. I used my press gallery pass to get into the room where the press conference was being held. Zhang was already there with a video camera, but he wanted me to provide a written transcript of the press conference. He also wanted me to use whatever sources I had in the government to find out what had happened in the Dalai Lama's private meeting with Harper earlier in the day. I asked if this material would be used in any kind of news story. Zhang said no. Xinhua does not report on Tibetan separatists, he said. To do so would cause the government to lose face. Over the past year, Xinhua's English language news site has carried a few stories mentioning the Dalai Lama. These mainly outline diplomatic objections filed with the leaders of countries who met with the spiritual leader. I reminded Zhang that the press conference was open only to accredited media. Xinhua was therefore using our Parliamentary Press Gallery ID to gather information on critics of China. If Xinhua would not carry any journalism on the Dalai Lama's visit, we were there under false pretenses, pretending to be journalists, but acting as government agents. We were allowed to be there as journalists, I wrote to Zhang in an email that I sent later that morning. We were not working as journalists. We were, by your description, gathering intelligence for China. That day, I felt that we were spies. It was time to draw the line. I put down my pen and notepad, listened to the Dalai Lama, shook his hand when he left, went home, and sent Xinhua an email telling him I quit. I was replaced by another press gallery freelancer within a few hours. So that's not even propaganda, is it? That's just spying. I remember about 20 years ago when some Falun Gong members had a press conference on Parliament Hill, and Xinhua sent some reporters to cover it. And instead of covering it, they actually stood up and started shouting at the Falun Gong, literally threatening them and insulting them and disrupting the event. So not just propaganda and not just spying, actual intimidation and disruption in our country. Imagine how much worse they are now, 20 years later. And so that spy ring, this group of propagandists and spies and agents provocateurs, is applying for membership in Trudeau's Parliamentary Press Gallery. The same group that repeatedly bans our reporters at Rebel News by saying that we're too partisan or we advocate too much or whatever they say, as if the Toronto Star and the CBC aren't as partisan, as if left-wing media groups don't advocate the way we do. But even Trudeau's own henchmen would never claim that we spy for a foreign power, that we disrupt our enemies like Xinhua does to the Falun Gong. And yet they are actually meeting to consider the application of Xinhua. Maybe Xinhua's giving them $100,000 too, like they gave to the Globe and Mail or the Toronto Star. And why not? The Parliamentary Press Gallery accredits foreign powers now, state broadcasters from Ukraine, from Vietnam, from Russia. I mean, there is no dictatorship they've refused yet. Why would they refuse China? They hate us at Rebel News. We're not allowed in. But genocidal countries that put millions of dissidents in internment camps, no problem. We're happy to take your application. Hey, did you see that billionaire tech bro who owns the Golden State Warriors NBA team? Do you see this?
Nobody cares about. Nobody cares about what's happening to the Uyghurs. Okay, you bring it up because you really care, and I think that's nice that you care. The rest of us don't care. I'm just telling you a very hard.
Wait, you're saying you personally don't care?
I'm telling you a very hard, ugly truth. Okay, of all the things that I care about, yes, it is below my line. Okay, of all the things that I care about, it is below my line.
I mean, look, if the NBA has to crawl over 1 million dead Uyghurs to get access to the Chinese TV audience, they'll do it, okay? I mean, money's money, okay? At least that NBA collaborator has an excuse. China is taking him from being very rich to being super rich. What's the excuse for the Parliamentary Press Gallery, though? I mean, seriously, are they being paid off? Take a look at this. It's a list of the executive of the Parliamentary Press Gallery. These are the deciders. These are the ones having the secret meetings. Seriously, they're doing it behind closed doors in secret, Chinese style. 8 people. 2 of them are from the CBC. They love China, or at least they do whatever Trudeau does, and he loves China. There's someone from the Globe and Mail, publisher of China Watch. So that's 3 yes votes, I'm presuming. 2 people from the Canadian Press, also a huge benefactor of Trudeau's bailout. 2 from Global News, extreme leftists, as you know, and 2 more Quebec bailout newspapers. I mean, seriously, these are the insiders of the insiders. There really is no separation between them and the Trudeau Liberals financially, ideologically, socially. Even their office space is right there in Parliament. So what do you think? Do you think Xinhua will be banned from the Parliamentary Press Gallery like Rebel News is? Or do you think, like the Golden State Warriors billionaire, it's just about the money and the power? We'll find out soon enough. That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.